I've never been big on antiques. My grandmother's house was always filled with old, weird things, and they gave me the creeps. But when I inherited her large cabinet of curiosities after she passed, I felt strangely compelled to keep it. Sentimental value, I guess. It took 2 people to move that cabinet into my small apartment. A tall wooden structure, nearly reaching my ceiling, with countless drawers, nooks, and crannies. The thing had been in our family for generations, and each section was filled with peculiar items: old coins, trinkets, bits of hair tied with ribbons, and aged photographs of strangers. It was a few days later, on a lazy Sunday, when I decided to explore it. I pulled open a random drawer and found a small, ornate box. The box felt strangely warm, and as I carefully lifted the lid, a strong, sweet scent filled the room. Inside, there was a tiny, lifelike figurine of a man. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that night, the dreams began. I was in my apartment, but it felt off. The colors were muted, and there was an overwhelming feeling of being watched. I walked into the living room, and there it was, the cabinet. But this time, each drawer was slightly open, and a muted whisper emanated from within. As I approached, the whispers grew louder and more frantic. I tried to run, but my feet were stuck, and the whispers turned to screams. And then suddenly, everything went silent. I woke up drenched in sweat. The next morning, I couldn't shake off the unease. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, but the memory of the whispers and the oppressive atmosphere felt very real. I walked over to the cabinet and noticed the same drawer slightly ajar. I hesitated, then slowly pushed it closed. Days turned into weeks, and every night I'd have the same dream. The intensity and fear grew each time. I started avoiding the living room, dreading the sight of the cabinet. One evening, after another restless night, I decided to confide in my friend Mark. He was a logical guy and dismissed my fears as a product of grief and stress. But seeing my distress, he offered to spend the night. Mark was a deep sleeper, so when I was jolted awake by that now too familiar feeling of unease, he remained soundly asleep. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to confront whatever was tormenting me. As I neared the living room, the whispers returned. My heart raced, but I pressed on. Drawing on every ounce of courage, I walked up to the cabinet. I could feel the warmth coming off the box in the drawer. The whispers became distinct voices, begging, pleading. I reached out, yanked the drawer open, and grabbed the box. The voices stopped. Feeling a sudden resolve, I decided to bury the box. It seemed like the only way. Grabbing a shovel, I went to a nearby wooded area and dug a deep hole, placing the box inside and covering it. The night air was still, and for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. When I returned home, Mark was awake, looking terrified. He said he'd woken up to voices and had seen shadowy figures around the apartment, all converging on the cabinet. As he described his experience, I realized something. The box wasn't the source, it was a seal. By removing it, I'd unleashed something far worse. The following days were a nightmare. Objects would move on their own, lights flickered, and those shadowy figures Mark described. I began seeing them too. They were always at the edge of my vision, lurking. Desperate for answers, I decided to visit a local historian. After listening to my story, she spoke of an old town legend. Apparently, centuries ago, a man had been accused of witchcraft and was said to have trapped souls in various items. The cabinet was believed to be one of them, with the box acting as a lock. Realization washed over me. The figurine, it was him. The trapped souls were trying to communicate, to warn me. I needed to find that box. Rushing back to the woods, I frantically began digging. Hours passed, but there was no sign of the box. Just when I was about to give up, my shovel hit something. I quickly unearthed the box, but it was changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by an icy cold, and the figurine had shifted position. It was now standing upright, arms outstretched, as if beckoning. Knowing what I had to do, I rushed home. The atmosphere in my apartment was thick, oppressive. The shadow figures were more visible now, their features twisted in anguish. I could feel their eyes on me as I approached the cabinet. I placed the box back into the drawer. Immediately, the temperature dropped, and the room went silent. As I looked around, the figures began to fade, nodding in what seemed like gratitude. It's been months now, and the nightmares have stopped. But I can't shake off the feeling of being watched. And every now and then, when I pass by the cabinet, I swear I hear a soft, mocking laugh. I've since moved out of that apartment, leaving the cabinet behind. But I sometimes wonder, what other cursed items lie out there waiting to be found? And who, like me, might unknowingly unleash the horrors trapped within?